Okay.
The International Institute of Refrigeration was founded in 1908. It is an independent, intergovernmental science and technology-based organization, which mission is the worldwide dissemination of knowledge on all refrigeration technologies and users. And our slogan is Refrigeration for Sustainable Development. All our actions are clearly linked with the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. Key domains of our activities include food quality and safety from farm to consumer, comfort in homes and commercial buildings, healthcare products and services, low temperature and liquefied gas technologies, energy efficiency, and the use of low ozone depleting and low global warming refrigerants. We have an international network with 69 member countries, almost 1,000 corporate and private members, and more than 300 experts, and partnerships with a lot of organizations, especially the various United Nations and agencies and programs. We are providing to our members a refrigeration information network adapted to their needs. The Freedom database with articles from all over the world. We already have more than 100,000 references. We have the International Journal of Refrigeration, the best peer-reviewed scientific journal in the field. We have course guides, courses online or outside, informatory notes for decision makers, professional directories, expertise directory, laboratories directory, international dictionary of refrigeration. We publish a newsletter, distributed monthly. We organize conferences, 5 IR conferences, 8 IR conferences per year, working groups on various subjects, and we are partners in research and development projects with the United Nations, with some countries, the European Union funds, with the member network in Europe, in Asia, in Africa. So visit our website. I would like to insist on the main challenges. First, the fact that refrigeration use will continue to dramatically increase. We have a growing population in under-equipped developing countries. We have air conditioning in warm countries, which are under-equipped compared to USA, for instance, and because of adaptation to global warming everywhere. Even if natural solutions shall be developed, it is a vital issue in many countries and during heat waves elsewhere. According to the International Energy Agency, energy needs for space cooling, already more than 8% of global electricity consumption, could triple by 2050. Because of cold chains in developing countries, because of food losses and their impact on the environment, food security and health issues, safe food, vaccines, other health products, developing countries can have a refrigeration capacity concerning flooded storage, vehicles, domestic refrigerators, 10 times lower than in some developed countries. We have energy needs and solutions such as heat pumps, liquefied natural gas, hydrogen, where all the new technologies, information technologies, biotechnologies, nanotechnologies, space technologies need a certain level of temperature and thus refrigeration. And we have many other users, including vital users in hospitals. We have environmental users such as carbon capture and storage, species preservation, etc. Regarding their carbon footprint, we have two main issues except material factories. Whatever the technology, we have a need of energy and thus energy efficiency and use of renewable energies issues. Most technologies are based on vapor compression systems with the use of fluids, generally high global warming potential fluids, if there are leakages, decrease of operation, maintenance, and end of life. And then the second challenge related to fluids. Connected fluids, CFCs, which destroy the stratospheric ozone layer, are currently or will be very soon phased out thanks to the Montreal Protocol. Also, the current major fluids, HFCs, with no effect on the ozone layer, which is still often are potent greenhouse gases. Wow, the Kigali Amendment of the Montreal Protocol organizes their phase down. However, even if low GWP refrigerants exist, we have potential other environmental drawbacks, such as TFAs with HFOs, or security problems with natural refrigerants, ammonia, CO2 hydrocarbons. Then it is still a challenge. According to IAEA estimations, in 2017, the ocean sector represents 7.8% of total greenhouse gases emissions and 4.9% are due to the energy consumption and 2.7% due to fluids. And these figures are certainly much higher now because of the increasing needs of refrigeration. The consequences. A part of environmental issues, we have an health issue, safe food, vaccines, health products, air conditioning, and the food security issue. Food losses could be almost 1 billion people. The ocean can be a solution for global warming. Approaching similar capacity in developing countries than in developed countries could halve the carbon footprint of the current cold food chain of products which should be refrigerated. And in addition, for instance, heat pumps are also a very good environmental solution for heating needs. However, in any case, we need to limit the renovation environmental impact thanks to insulation, passive cooling, technologies. But the issue of fluoridated refrigerants is progressively solved thanks to the Montreal Protocol and the Kigali Amendment, but the energy issue is in front of us. Thinking on general systems, buildings, districts, there will be a presentation regarding district cooling just afterwards. So having the scale of a district for heating and cooling is certainly a very good tool to do it. Thinking general systems, not only electric systems alone, will be necessary. Today, we will have the application in two main sectors, food and health products, cold chains, and heat pumps. I will not develop the various research and development projects we currently have. They will be presented afterwards by Judith and Toby. You must know that we have a lot of partners which are financing this project, and it's fine. To welcome other projects, I would like to mention just very quickly the project we have with Bangladesh and India regarding the cold chain, the project we have with the European Union in order to have a decarbonized food chain in 2050 in Europe. We have a project in Africa regarding hospitals and pharmacies, and then UNEP.
Thank you, Didier, for presenting the main challenges faced by the refrigeration sector and its related environmental issues. Global warming has no borders, and therefore we need to provide with global solutions, sustainable, clean, and efficient solutions, not only for high-income countries, but also for emerging and low-income countries, through knowledge transfer, education, training, and capacity building on the different stakeholders, namely of the operators on how to use the technology, awareness rates of policymakers on why to invest in these technologies, and consumer on how the clean technology meet their needs while reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. Within this context, I would like to invite our second speaker, Judith, to give a talk about how to develop a robust, reliable cold chain in Bangladesh and India, the issue and potential for growth as a part of the technical assistance performed by the International Institute of Refrigeration to the World Bank through a number of our experts, including Judith. Judith is a director of RD&T and professor at London South Bank University. She has 35 years experience of working on food refrigeration operations throughout the food cold chain. Her main area of interest are related to the efficiency and energy reduction, as well as the design and performance of refrigeration equipment. Also the head of the IAR section on biology and food technology. She's the delegate of the UK and the member of the IAR management committee. So Judith, I'm going to share your slides. Ask for next. Fine by you, Judith?
So, can you see my slides?
Yes.
Brilliant. Sorry about that.
No.
Thank you.
We can't see them online.
Oh. Can we have the technical assistance, please? Okay, I'm going to share the screen. Do you see? Do you see the slides, Judith?
I've got my slides at the moment.
Yes, we see them.
You see? Okay, that's fine.
So that's your slides you're showing rather than mine.
Judith, do you see the slides?
Yes, but I can't use my pointer or anything. So, but I can't share my slides, I assume.
No, don't share your slides. I'm sharing for you. So please ask for next, and I will do.
Okay. If you can go back to the first slide, then please. Thanks, Josh. So, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Judith Evans. I think Josh introduced me just very well recently. So I'm going to be talking about two projects that we've been involved in Bangladesh and India. Next slide, please, Josh. So just to give you some idea of the relevance of cooling, the food cold chains in lower income countries in particular are developing incredibly rapidly. There's often a lack of access to cooling, particularly for farmers, and this has a huge impact on their well-being and life. Often income is quite low, often due to high levels of food loss, which I'll talk about a little bit in a minute. Health is often impacted. It's not just a matter of people having suboptimal food that doesn't have the best vitamins and minerals, it's also about food safety as well. Hunger is a huge issue, and in particular in Africa, you have about 20% of people who are undernourished. Food security or insecurity is also a global and national issue, and moderate or severe food insecurity has been increasing now for the past 6 years. And again, it's affecting Africa more than any other part of the world, with just under 58% of people having moderate or severe food insecurity. And cooling and access to cold chains can actually help mitigate some of these issues. Next slide, please, Josh. So the role of refrigeration, there's a nice informatory note from the IIR, which talks about the role of refrigeration and the impact of preserving food. A lot of food that's actually produced is not actually preserved very well. In fact, about 778 million tons of food is preserved by refrigeration, but theoretically at least double of that should benefit from refrigeration. About 13% of the food produced is lost due to lack of refrigeration. And that's much, much higher in African countries where about 37% of all food is lost between production and consumption. Lack of cooling has a major impact on this. Next slide, please, Josh. The challenge really is that global food demand is set to grow by somewhere between 59 to 98% by 2050. And that's driven by, firstly, population growth. You can see the diagram on the right-hand side. That's based on size of countries. You can see size of countries now. In 2050, it's the size of the country based on their population. And you can see that the majority of population growth is going to be in Africa and Asia. There's also migration to cities. People are moving away from farmland and into cities. There's changes in diet. There's also, we need to remember that global warming is impacting food production. We're already seeing the impact of drought and flooding, and also the impact of higher temperatures. And this is much more significant in the global south than in the global north, where a lot of the lower income countries in the global south are actually seeing significant impacts. And so we need to provide sustainable and realistic practical solutions to help people. We need to make sure that systems are integrated and smart. We need to support the development of food chains in low-income countries, and at the same time improve knowledge transfer, prove the benefits of technology and processes, improve the skills and training, reduce the resilience on fossil fuels, and at the same time move to low global warming potential refrigerants. So you can see there's a huge amount to do. Next slide, please, Yosh. I'm going to be talking very quickly about a couple of examples we've worked on recently in Bangladesh and India. Both of these are World Bank projects, involved a number of partners, but in both projects, the IIR and RD&T were involved. In Bangladesh, we were looking at the milk and dairy cold chains, and in India, we're looking at developing cold chains using the inland waterways. And in all these projects, we were looking at a whole range of things, including what technologies are available, the business models that could be applied, what behaviour issues might be associated with the uptake of a cold chain, what training was required, and the support and policy interventions. And I don't really have time to talk about all these today, so what I've tried to do is pick out a few interesting points that I can tell you about each project. So next slide, please, Josh. So the current meat and dairy production chain in Bangladesh, the issue really is that most farms are very, very small. A lot of farms only have a few cows in terms of milk production, and they produce enough milk that's sufficient for themselves and their neighbours. And that's often because the cows are not particularly productive. And meat is often slaughtered in wet markets, so no official abattoirs, just slaughtered in a market and then taken to home for consumption. The milk and milk chains are actually dominated by this informal sector, but there is a formal sector also that's available. The main issue really is that a lot of farms are in rural areas, often with lack of access to electricity. Even when there is access to power, the grid is not very good, and you can have significant parts of the day when there's power cuts. The farmers generally have very low incomes, often less than $2 a day, and so they don't really have the money themselves or the collateral to be able to borrow money to be able to fund some of these improvements in the cold chain. Next slide, please, Josh. So there's a huge number of issues to overcome. Farmers often can be quite ambitious and want to expand their operations, but land's at a premium. They have limited access to finances, and farms need to be bigger to be able to justify a cold chain. And there needs to be better integration as well. There isn't really a justification at the moment to put calling directly on individual farms, but there is a justification to put in central village milk collection centres where farmers can bring their milk and they have shared facilities. Renewable energy's got considerable potential, as many farms are off-grid. There's a huge lack of understanding of hygiene and food safety and the need for training. Animal welfare is not prioritised, and there's a need for finances and suitable business models to be developed so that the farmers can uptake technologies. There's also a huge marketing exercise as well, which is to do with comprehension of the value of chilled foods. People often don't always appreciate the value of chilled foods because they've had bad experiences in the past. And all this is surrounded by significant projected change in the production of milk and meat. You can see the graphs on the right-hand side. Even with low growth, there's still projected growths, but there's still capacity within the formal current chain. So as a short-term option, there's a good argument to actually utilise those facilities as other facilities are being developed to uptake that future gap. Next slide, please, Yosh. So overall, the one thing I wanted really to emphasise is there's a huge level of baseline activities, which is really step one in the process. People need to actually put in place the training, the support, the finances as the first step. Otherwise, the cold chain is not going to be successful before you actually implement the cold chain and actually apply any technologies. And afterwards, well, you need ongoing support as well to make sure that cold chain is monitored, it's doing exactly what you hoped it would do. And if it's not, you can make tweaks and changes. So it's really, really important to have those baseline activities in the first place. Next slide, Yosh. In terms of India, we're working in Kolkata, where there's huge issues for food trucks to get into the city. It's mainly that there's big hold-ups on the bridges, which is across the main Hooghly River. And most of the trucks that bring food in are unrefrigerated. There's really significant delays, but we found that there is nearly always carbon emission savings by using boats instead of the road. There are more efficient options, but the cost sometimes is the limiting factor. Cost is not always reduced by using the rivers, and it's not always quicker. And so you have to be quite careful where you apply the inland waterways to food transportation if you want to be quicker and save money. There's huge potential there to be able to use, reefer trucks, ro-ro ferries, refrigerated vehicles, but also huge issues in access to lower GWP refrigerants. Next slide, please, Yosh. Again, we have the same sort of scenario where you really need to develop infrastructure at the start before you actually start applying any technology. And in this case in particular, there's a need for policy and also development of infrastructure, particularly at the docks, to make sure that you have that cold chain and linkages both downstream and upstream. We also noted there's quite a few issues as well with other parts of the cold chain. Although there's cold stores, for example, they're often not very efficient and they're quite old. And so there's a huge need to actually assess the situation, develop that infrastructure before you actually start applying those cleaner technologies. Next slide, please, Josh.
1 minute, please, Judith.
Yep, I'm just about to finish. I just wanted to also say there's a lot of links into other projects as well. Toby's going to be talking about ACEs in a minute, which we're also involved in. But Didier also mentioned the ENOUGH project. We have decarbonisation projects in the UK. And these all lead into these other projects as well, in that we're developing low carbon technologies. And one of the things we need to be very clear about is that if possible, we want to try and encourage lower income countries to leapfrog to some of these newer technologies that are appropriate for them, and to not, get into the issues, for example, in developed countries where we've gone through a transitionary period with higher GWP refrigerants before moving to the low GWP refrigerants. So there's huge opportunities for the lower income countries to leapfrog and miss out some of those steps that we've seen in developed countries. Next slide, please, Josh. So thank you very much, everybody, for listening. My contact details are there. I'm very happy to answer any questions later, or if anybody wants to contact me. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. Thank you very much for your presentation. And as you said, the global food demand is set to grow by 59 to 98% by 2050. So knowing that the current emissions related to the current food chain represent about 1/3 of the global emissions quantified by the FAO to be 16 gigaton CO2 equivalent in 2020. So this clearly shows the urgent need to adapt procuring approach in concrete actions tackling the climate change, energy, health, and food crisis. And within this context, I'm thrilled to invite our first speaker, Toby Peters, for a talk about sustainable cold chain, as well as the first of kind center dedicated for sustainable cooling for food and health, the Africa Center of Excellence for Sustainable Cooling and Cold Chain. Toby Peters is a professor of cold economy at the Birmingham and Harvard University and director of the Center for Sustainable Cooling. Toby is the academic lead for the Centers of Excellence for Sustainable Cooling in cold chain program in Africa and India. He's a multi-award winning technology developer and has extensive industry and academic experience in energy systems, energy storage, and sustainable cooling in cold chain for food and health. I'm going to share your slides. Do you see the screen, Toby?
I still see Judith's slide. No, there you are. Thank you. Lovely.
Yeah.
Great. So thanks a lot, Yosh. And if you could jump to the next slide. And yeah, lovely. Thank you. So globally, less than half of the food that requires refrigeration worldwide is refrigerated. In low and middle income countries, less than 20%. As we've heard, lack of refrigeration results in the loss of about 12% of total food production globally. At the same time, 25% of vaccine doses are also wasted due to failures within cold chains. Let's not forget that more than 1.5 million people globally die from vaccine-preventable diseases each year. At the same time, 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions are caused by cold chain technologies and lost food. Next slide, please. What does this mean in real terms? In Rwanda, for example, food loss equates to about 16% of greenhouse gas emissions, as well as 21% of total land use, and 12% loss to its annual gross domestic productivity. To ensure food security for all of Rwanda by 2050, food yields will actually have to be improved 15 times compared to 2019 levels. But if food loss were eliminated, yields would only need to be improved 9 times to achieve food security. So in short, food saved is as important as food produced. But for me, the exam question is a complicated one. How do you create the temperature-controlled, local and global field-to-fork connectivity to nutritiously feed 10 billion people from hundreds of millions of small-scale farmers whose livelihoods and well-being are often dependent on only 1 or 2 hectares of land or less, all without using diesel? Next slide, please. The challenge is that temperature-controlled supply chain networks are complex. They require coordination across multiple stakeholders, both across countries and between continents. To date, where donors do engage, they often continue to pour money and effort into the same flawed solutions. More production without addressing loss to market, cold storage buildings that are relatively worthless without the other cold chain links, no technical training, and even worse, obsolete technologies leading to higher emissions and financial costs. Such solutions are unsustainable and not market orientated. In actual fact, in Rwanda, 96% of farmers living in the vicinity of donor-funded cold rooms don't use them. Next slide, please. Additionally, despite the strategic role that cold chain plays in delivering key development and climate targets, cold chains are mainly owned and governed by the private sector that often prioritise the crops with better financial returns, not the impact that could be achieved on the economy, environment and society as a whole. And the broad range of societal benefits from access to sustainable and resilient cold chains are actually treated as soft wins and suffer from a lack of long-term investment and a piecemeal approach. So governments, for me, need to make cold chains part of critical infrastructure if they're to break millions of rural and urban poor out of poverty and hunger, and ensure the ability of food and healthcare systems to absorb external events and shocks. Another major aspect that to date is overlooked often is that cold chains are global. For example, in the UK, we're reliant on imports for about 84% of fruits and 47% of vegetables. As we've heard, food production will need to increase significantly to feed the expected human population by 2050. We need global cooperation and investment to deliver equitable and inclusive development of the cold chain in low-income countries for our own food resilience globally. Next slide, please. At the same time, we need to understand the interplay with renewable energy, climate-friendly refrigerants, as well as the impacts and opportunity of radical and new innovations, be it new refrigeration cycles, the use of drones, blockchain, as well as the food innovations that we're starting to see, such as alternative proteins, vertical farming, which will change how we produce, distribute and consume food. And of course, let's not forget that for new vaccines, we might require sub-zero cold chains. Next slide, please. The Africa Centre of Excellence for Sustainable Cooling and Cold Chain is a first-of-a-kind centre for sustainable cooling and cold chain for food and health. The goal is the accelerated deployment of sustainable, environmentally, economically and socially resilient, temperature-controlled, end-to-end connectivity, which simultaneously protects the quality and safety of food and vaccines, minimises loss, and creates and provides equitable value to all stakeholders. Next slide, please. The aim is to be a one-stop provider of state-of-the-art technical and business assistance, training and knowledge transfer along the fork to farm to fork and vaccine manufacturer to arm continuum. The core structure of ACES is one centre of excellence in Rwanda, which is hosted by the University of Rwanda at the Ruberizi campus, where we undertake collaborative research, test new equipment, develop knowledge and training programmes, which is then complemented with, please next slide, specialised outreach and knowledge establishments or spokes across the continent, where we can showcase how solutions can be deployed in practical real-world applications and provide the outreach, learning, training and knowledge transfer and technical assistance to support local community uptake. The first of these are being developed in Kenya, Senegal and Lesotho. And the ACES model is a flagship of a global network with 2 other centres of excellence already in India in development in Telangana and Haryana. Next slide, please. At the Ruberizi campus, there will be dedicated space to demonstrate technologies and solutions, a fully equipped training centre to support the deployment of fit-for-market and purpose solutions to meet the needs of underserved communities. A business hub will provide tailored incubation, training and acceleration support for early-stage technology companies and entrepreneurs. And ACES will also be able to provide properly managed facilities in market to test and demonstrate innovative ideas and solutions. Working with government, development agencies, industries such as Carrier and Danfoss, academia, communities and wide stakeholders, the programme has been developed by a team at University of Birmingham, Judith leading the team at London South Bank, Heriot-Watt University and Cranfield, and the United Nations Environment Programme, with more than $20 million of seed investment to date. Next slide. Radical government is also currently approving. Next slide, Josh. Lovely, thank you. Is currently approving the allocation of a further 200 hectares alongside the ACES campus to create an integrated single campus with a complete logistics chain from soil and fridge. Next slide, please. So through ACES and its spokes, we will support, train and mentor farmer cooperatives and community leaders to build an operational resilient and sustainable community cooling hubs to unlock the economic potential of their community. And we're going to deliver the engineers who install and maintain equipment. Support business with access to properly managed facilities, identify skills gap, incubation space, and in-country delivery strategies. Next slide, please. It's my last slide, Yosh. So low and middle-income countries struggle with multiple developmental challenges from food security, malnutrition, poverty, and health to education equality. Achieving these goals will require developing an end-to-end sustainable, resilient, inclusive, and equitable cold chain for food and farming. The imperative we face is how to provide this global connected cold chain, which also delivers against the commitments under the Paris Agreement and the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. That's what we're setting out to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Toby. And I think the co-president, he said it all about ACES. So probably now we can go to the question and answer session. I'm happy to pick up any question from the audience. Do you have any question? Yeah. Any question? Okay. Okay, so Toby, probably I may have one question for you, So we may know the impact of the current and an improved cold chain on the climate change in terms of efficiency and emission reduction. What does the climate change mean for the cold chain?
Well, the problem is that as we see increases in temperature, we need more cooling, so there's more food which will need to be cooled, and also the cooling will require more energy to deliver, to keep foods cold and at the right temperature, in a warming environment. And as we know, we're going to see reduction in the amount of land which is available to food and all those constraints. So the challenge we face is how do you deliver sustainable cooling in a plus 45 or even plus 50 degree environment? It's a big challenge and we need to start work on it now.
Yes, okay, Toby, thank you for answering. Any question? Yes, please, Graham. Yeah, the lady may circulate the microphone. Thank you. Graham, please come. Yeah.
Hi, thanks very much for fantastic presentations and yeah, some really important subjects. And my question is about how much of this is going to be solved from a technological perspective, and how much is it you need to educate people in the field? And that's a tricky one. So if we were to do that, how might we go about educating people in low-income countries about how to cool their crops in a more appropriate way?
Thank you, Graham. So who would like to pick up this question? Toby?
Yes, well, that's obviously a very good question, and that's part of the purpose of ACES. It's not just about technology, it's also about the business model, it's about the skills. But I think the start point has to be is governments need to recognise that for a functioning society, cold chain is absolutely critical infrastructure, as important as a water pipe or an electricity cable. Until we start recognising its foundational role for our society, we're not going to see the changes which are urgently needed. Judith, over to you. I'm sure you've got something to add.
I was only going to really say that obviously technology is important, but it's not everything. If you don't train people to use the technology, actually make sure that they're using it properly and get the full benefits of it, it's going to be no use at all. And obviously all the finances that go around that as well, being able to afford it. So there's a huge amount that surrounds the whole application of a cold chain that isn't just technological.
Yes, thank you, Judith. So this shows the important role of education and knowledge transfer. Didier, Coulomb, we have, yeah.
I would like to add a few things. First, well, there is something which is fine, is the fact that regarding the national determined contributions of the various countries, we now have, and it is the first time we have, some countries, about 50 countries, which have a national cooling action plan. However, generally speaking, they are not very detailed, and now we have to really implement some plans. Thus, the awareness of the governments is increasing, but in my opinion, not enough. And it is important to involve the governments. And education is clearly also a kind of task of government. Secondly, there is clearly a need of information regarding the public, and we try within the IAR to inform the public, to train people, to attract people in the refrigeration sector, because we don't have enough people in the refrigeration sector. So regarding the young generation, thanks to exhibitions, thanks to the World Refrigeration Day each year, we try to promote refrigeration and also to develop our training courses for people, for technicians, because the challenges are very important regarding new refrigerants, regarding energy efficiency especially. So training is important, but more it is also the education of all the people, the government, and the young generation, which is important.
Yeah, thank you, Didier Coulomb. Again, it comes back to education. Education, again, it's not only about technology. It's only a couple of minutes left in the cooling session. I would like to take this opportunity to ask Judith a question. So this is related to the Bangladesh project, Judith. So both of us, we know that we have done this market assessment for this project when we have noticed that about 90% of the livestock sector is dominated by the informal sector, and where the cold chain is practically inexistent in Bangladesh. So do you think that we should adopt a cookie cutter approach, as you call it? Or should we instead and provide basically with ready equipment to be installed, or should we look at the local needs first and then provide with a country-specific equipment? What do you think?
I think it's really important to do that initial needs assessment and to assess what is actually needed by local farmers, local communities. Investigate how they're going to work together, because as I said in my presentation, it's not feasible for every farm in Bangladesh to have a cooling system. It's not practical and it's not financially viable. So people need to work together, and you need to look at actually what's needed and where it's needed, how it's going to integrate into the cold chain upstream. So that needs assessment really is everything, I think.
Thank you very much, Judith. I would like to thank all our speakers, Didier, Coulomb, Judith Evans, and Toby Peters. Thank you very much for their great input into the session. I think it's time to pass it over to my colleague, Annisa Sekaringtias, so moderating the heating session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yosr. Now we'll turn to the heat segment of the discussion. My name is Annisa. I'm from E3J, we're a climate think tank based in London. So heat is the largest global energy end use, accounting for 50% of global final energy consumption and 40% of global CO2 emission. Almost half of that heat is consumed in buildings, mostly for water and space heating. But fossil fuels still account for 64% of global energy use for buildings-related heating. And this is a decrease of only 3% since 2010. Yet to keep warming below 1.5 degrees, we need to end the installation of new fossil heating systems by 2025 and retrofit half of the world's buildings by 2040. The urgency to decarbonize buildings is even higher now with countries facing the current gas crisis. Now, this event is an opportunity to dive into some of the clean heat solutions available to keep us on track to net zero heating. So we're very lucky to have our brilliant speakers here with us today. We have Dr. Allouche joining us virtually as a senior associate at RAP. We have Ludwig Labuzinski, senior expert in international building and construction from German Energy Agency, and we have Dr. Zhuolun Chen, senior advisor in district energy and buildings. And after the presentation, we will also have time for questions from the audience, so please keep your questions until then. Now we turn to the first speaker. Dr. Allouche is a specialist in technology and policy associated with heating and is based within RAP's Europe Energy Program. He has over 10 years heat policy experience in industry, academia, and also working with policymakers. He will be talking about policy toolkit for global mass heat pump deployment. Dr. Yosr, you have 8 minutes. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Annisa, and hello, COP. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for asking me to speak. So today we've launched this global policy toolkit for heat pumps, and it might sound quite specific, but I'll explain the context and then the purpose of such a toolkit. If you'd like to browse the toolkit while I speak, you can use this QR code if it works online to get a link. If not, you can look at the Regulatory Assistance Project's website, and it's currently on our homepage. Okay, next please, Annisa. So firstly, why heat pumps? Well, there's a need obviously to decarbonise heating as part of the global energy sector. When we look at how heat is currently provided, this pie chart on the left-hand side shows that, and around 72.5% of heating currently comes from fossil fuels. All of that needs to be replaced by something else by 2050 at the latest, basically. And heat pumps look like a key solution as part of that replacement. I won't talk in much detail about the image on the right-hand side, But heat pumps do offer various benefits beyond just the fact that they're low carbon. They take much of the heat out of the environment that they produce, which is inexhaustible, and so this is naturally clean. They're very efficient, so they can reduce the overall primary energy demand in energy systems by around perhaps 2/3. They're cost effective. They appear in almost all analysis to be the cheapest way of decarbonising heating for most homes. They can provide cooling, which, as we've heard previously, is likely to increase, although we should consider this in the context of sustainable cooling. And they can be used in large heating systems and central heating systems in buildings and also in district heating networks. And they can also encourage the growth of renewable electricity. So there are plenty of benefits for heat pumps beyond the fact that they're extremely low carbon, but equally they are also likely to be the most important low carbon heating technology as we move forwards. Thanks. So just to give an idea of how much heat pumps need to grow, there are two graphs here which both show the same thing but in a slightly different way. So the graph on the left is from the International Energy Agency's net zero by 2050 emissions scenario. And the chunk of heat pumps is the turquoise section on these bar charts in both of them. So keeping on the left-hand one, you can see that currently heat pumps do provide a significant share, but currently fossil fuels a larger share. Actually, by the time we get to 2030, the IEA's scenario says that heat pumps will be the most important heating technology around the world. So that's by 2030 already. And then you can see by 2050, they become larger than any other sector of heating combined. And that's by the total number of heat pumps in existence. And the graph on the right-hand side, the bar chart, is from a McKinsey analysis, which also looked at a net zero energy scenario. And it shows a very similar thing, a significant growth in heat pumps almost immediately, to the point where in 2050, they pretty much dominate the entire heat mix around the world. So clearly a very important, a strategically important technology. Thank you. Okay, so when we look at these numbers and how they compare to current growth, what we can basically see is that a step change in deployment is needed. So the line at the bottom here, the turquoise line, shows the growth in heat pumps from 2010 to 2020, which has shown some increase. And recently, the market is growing, which is encouraging. But if we extrapolate that line, it carries on a trajectory which is increasing, but not quickly enough. And so the exponential increase, the line that really shoots off, that's the IEA's net zero scenario. And so we've got to fill in that gap. And clearly policy measures will be needed to drive such a rapid uptake for heat pumps. Thank you. So what we did is we have looked around the world at different options for policy measures for heat decarbonisation, but in particular we focused on where heat pump deployment has been rapid and has been sustained. And there are four really standout measures. So first of all, packages of policy measures need to be developed together. A single policy on its own won't be enough. In those policy measures, pricing reform and financial support is needed. So you need to tackle the fundamental economics of heating to make this work. But equally, softer measures such as skills and engagement are also vital. And finally, it's worth bearing in mind that policy support needs to be sustained. Stop-start policy won't work here, and we simply don't have time for that. And so governments need to be quite explicit about what they're going for. Okay, thank you. So with our partners, and we've been working on this project with CLASP, who are experts in appliance standards, and with GBPN, who are experts in the performance of buildings, we've developed our toolkit model. And the report that's released today is based around this idea of a temple structure, with the roof of which is a sustainable heat pump market, and that's being held up by four key elements. There are 3 pillars and a strong foundation. The pillars are the key elements of policy which policymakers need to think about when they're promoting heat pumps. They include economic and market instruments, financial support such as grants and subsidies, and the use of regulation, things like bans and standards for homes. And all of those need to sit on a strong foundation of things like communication and skills development. And so really what we're really saying in the report is that to deploy heat pumps at the rate needed, you need to consider all of these things together, because if you don't, the sustainable heat pump market won't develop, and it certainly won't develop at the speed required by decarbonisation timescales. Thanks, Lisa. Okay, so I'm almost at the end of my presentation. I just wanted to show how we've developed this toolkit. And so the toolkit, as well as having the graphical images, we also have detailed deep dives into various different policy measures which exist. And if you open up the toolkit, you'll be able to look at each section and understand different types of policies that exist, how they function and what the issues and difficulties of them might be. And it's worth saying there are many different ways of developing heat pump policies, but there are issues with some of them, and they need to be designed in a way that works in their particular context. And alongside our policy toolkit, we've also developed a video series, and there is a YouTube series which basically describes the entirety of the toolkit in 8 minutes. And so if you've got 8 minutes to spare, you can watch this, and hopefully it will draw people back into the main toolkit itself. Okay, and so just to wrap up, thanks for listening. I'd like to thank our partners on this project. It's a great pleasure to be speaking today, and we're very pleased that we were able to launch this during COP. Just want to say finally that heat pumps are seen as a centrally important technology for decarbonising heating around the world. And there are many different policy measures which exist to promote heat pumps, but fundamentally you need to consider how all of the different elements work together, and that includes communication, provision of subsidies, the pricing of energy, and the use of regulations. But it's really important to remember, as challenging as this may be, there are significant benefits which go beyond climate. So heat pumps are central to decarbonisation, but they can also provide local air pollution reductions, they can support the growth of renewable energy, and they can help with the development and retrofitting of sustainable cities, all of which support wider UN Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Richard. Now that we've covered the urgency and the required measures, we'll go to how do countries exactly deliver this. We have Ludwig Labuzinski from German Energy Agency, DENA, who will share with us examples from Germany and German ambition.
Well, thank you very much, Annisa. Thank you for the welcoming introduction. Hi, everybody. My name is Ludwig Labuzinski from the German Energy Agency. Thanks for those interesting insights so far. Also, thanks to Richard on the heat pumps part. We're also working with Richard together on the Clean Heat Forum, which I want to promote here. Also, David, I see you for the Clean Heat Forum. Well, now let's dive into the German ambition on clean heat. I want to present to you some about the political framework in Germany and also some implementation approaches. And to start off, I brought 3 quick slides to set the scene for Germany, the regional context. So 3 things you should know about in the beginning. So first of all, given the climatic conditions, of course, in Germany, heating, especially space heating, accounts for the highest share of energy consumption in Germany's buildings. Secondly, more than 80% of the demand for heating is currently covered by the combustion of, well, oil and gas, most of which is also imported. And only, as you can see here on this graph, 5% are so-called heat pumps. And thirdly, looking at the existing building stock, the main challenge is that 75% of residential buildings are older than 40 years. And there is, well, very great need and potential for energy savings for those buildings. With those 3 aspects in mind, let's start with the political framework. Of course, the political framework is also embedded in the EU, but I will have to skip this here now and rather focus on 2 aspects. So the clean heat transition in Germany faces a very high sense of urgency. On the one hand, the security of supply is on the current agenda, of course, aiming at the independence of Russian gas imports, which also initiates an accelerated gas phase-out. On the other hand, oh sorry, too early, more efforts are needed to reach the climate goals. In fact, in Germany, we have the Climate Change Act. That's the framework to achieve greenhouse gas neutrality by 2045. And there are certain pathways for emission reduction prescribed for every sector. But in fact, since the targets were missed for the building sector, there was by law, it was forced that there needed to be amendments or a program needed to be updated. So we now have the 2022 Immediate Action Program. I just want to highlight this, that it's interesting that actually by law this is enforced. If the path is not on track, you have to present this, or the certain ministry has to present this. And this action program highlights on 3 pillars, so replacing heating systems, tax incentives for energy efficient building refurbishment, and energy consulting. As we are looking on the clean heat transition, I want to focus on 4 aspects from this program. So one new target is framed in the so-called heat pump offensive. By 2030, there is the goal that there will be 6 million heat pumps installed in Germany, which is well, challenging looking at the current rate of installation, so this needs to be increased by actually a factor of 3. Then there will be a shift to renewable heat. There will be the obligation that from 2024 on, every newly installed heating system is to operate with at least 65% renewable energy. And well, this is actually like a paradigmatic change, because this is rather a forceful fade-out of well, fossil fuels. Then boosting district heating is also on the agenda by through federal funding for efficient heat networks, and lastly, the introduction of municipal heat planning to speed up the clean transition is also in this program, and I want to dive into that a little bit more in the last part. The implementation approaches, so just a selection where DENA is involved, and following up on the municipal heat planning. This is actually the first regional instrument for locally developing and implementing climate-neutral heat supply, and the required strategic and planning measures. And therefore, DENA started this new center actually now with more than 20 plus colleagues involved to well, get in the way and initiate a knowledge transfer and best practice exchange between municipalities in Germany. Then, as the clean heat transition depends on the energy efficiency of buildings, the rate of refurbishment drastically needs to be speed up. And one approach DENA is working on is the energy sprung approach for serial refurbishment, so opening up new markets for this approach. And the idea is that with digitalized construction processes and serially prefabricated elements, so such as roofs and facades and energy modules, buildings can be refurbished much faster in a climate-neutral way. And well, just to show you, this actually works also in neighboring countries of Germany, so as for example the Netherlands, where this approach actually comes from. So further zooming out, not only to neighboring countries, I want to give you one last example how DENA is involved internationally. So we have the project on energy efficient building in China, on eco-cities, so with the aim to improve the market conditions for energy efficient buildings. Other projects are for energy partnerships. And well, leaving you here with this last slide, I want to highlight that I'm also involved in other projects focusing on the development of the roadmap for the Greater Bay Area in China, and we will have a session on this on Wednesday actually, and I want to invite you, if you are here in person, also to join our event on Wednesday. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. much, Ludwig. Those are some encouraging examples from Germany, and certainly we look forward to other best practices and examples from many other countries. Now we turn to Dr. Zhuolun Chen, who is a senior advisor in district energy and buildings. Dr. Chen holds a PhD in building science and architectural engineering, a certified LEED EHPA by US Green Building Company, and a CMP by EBO. He has over 25 years of experience on project development of district energy efficiency, and green buildings. With UNEP, he's working to promote and implement sustainable district in the cities of over 30 emerging and developing economies. Now his presentation will be a good final presentation to wrap the session, because he will touch upon both cooling and heating in district energy. Over to you.
It's not my presentation. It's not my presentation. I give you the most updated one.
Presentation 6.
No, I give you the updated one.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Just slideshow. It's okay. Just press on slideshow. Perfect.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So thank you very much, and then for all the wonderful presentations before, and then I think that like a lot of panelists already talk about both heating and cooling and the possibility to combine heating and cooling. So actually, I would share with you that like this is something the district energy system that we have been working on for provide heating and cooling service to for buildings in the cities. So my topic will be district energy system for higher energy efficiency in regional level. So actually, why district energy? Actually, in 2014, actually in the UN climate summit, and then at that time, the former UN Secretary, Mr. Pungiman, has announced 5 key sectors to achieve energy efficiency under the UN's 2030 Sustainable Development Goal. And then these 5 sectors, we think that would be the key sectors with high potential through implementation. They can increase the energy efficiency. And then as you can see that district energy is one of them. So actually we consider district energy is related to 2 main sustainable development goals. The first one is SDG 7, affordable and clean energy, and then also there's 11 is sustainable cities and communities, and then this district energy system, including district heating, cooling, and domestic hot water, it can enable large share of renewable energy, and then also by increase the regional primary energy efficiency, so that they can have cities to increase their regional energy efficiency in a large scale. So what is here is what we found, that when we try to implement district energy system in developing countries, mainly what are the challenges? So we found that normally in local there's a lack of local capacity especially for developing countries. There's no data, so these 2 results will lead to very difficult to decide any investable or bankable projects, which cannot lead to implementation. And then also there's lack of there's hard to bridge the gap between the regulation level and the ground level, and then there's lack of long-term support for local authorities. And then last but not least, they need a very good standard and a very good transferability, so that the data collection, the evaluation, even the business model and the monitor of the system need to be standardized, and then they can follow in the future. So back to a little bit introduction of the system. Actually, what is the energy systems in cities that we consider this can be 3 parts. Actually, a lot of speakers already mentioned that the first part is the heating and cooling production sources. It can be like heat pump, it can be like gas boiler, chillers, it can even have like a river source, geothermal essential. And then these production sources, they produce heat and cool, and then they transfer through a pipeline network, and then to the building energy system, which is single building units. So this will be 3 parts. So actually, there's some innovation technology when we look at the past 30, 50, or even 70 years, how this district energy system and district cooling or heating system will generate or will move forward. So actually, you can see that the left side actually is from 1st generation to the 5th generation, and then each generation of the district heating, actually they will mark with higher energy efficiency, more integration of waste energy or low quality of energy, and then also integration of more renewable energy. And then also on the right side is the district cooling system, which is like only four generation, but they are moving as the similar path as district heating, and then we can see that as the current generation of district energy system. Multi-sector coupling is one of the key, and then it can enable large scale of integration of waste heat, natural resources, and renewable energy. And then we think that this is the future of the technology direction. And then what is the benefit of the district energy for cities? Actually, they can bring different types of benefit for cities, either GHG emission reduction, better air quality, like the city of Temuco in Chile. They use this for that purpose. And then also, a lot of cities they use this kind of district energy as one of the public service to provide heat and cooling to the citizens, so that they can have a better life. So my last slide, is about actually district cooling and then their energy efficiency compared to other cooling technologies. 2 things I would like to highlight is the difference of energy efficiency when you consider district energy system compared to standalone system. Is not only the primary energy system, but also the peak load shifting of the electricity, which standalone system cannot do that. So actually, as you can see here, for the district cooling system, actually compared to different types of cooling technologies, from split AC to normal standalone centralized system to these different types of district cooling system, actually the primary energy will increase from 25% to as high as 80%, and then the peak load shifting factor for electricity will increase from 0 from the room AC to tri-generation is around 60%. So that means that in terms of investment, in terms of capacity, that they can save at least 60% of all the investment. So here I end my presentation, and thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chen. Very fascinating presentation, and a perfect presentation to wrap the sessions. Now, the question and answer session. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Yeah, thanks. A quick question, I think for the heating panel on Dr. Lowe's mentioned the need on the platform of kind of the pillars for heating decarbonization, heat pump deployments, the need for solid communication and continued engagement with stakeholders. I'm wondering if Ludwig or Richard could maybe speak to best practices around communicating the need for heat pumps to the public, or how you are getting your policy measures out to the public so there's actually adoption on the ground from consumers. Thank you.
And perhaps we'll take one more questions first and then we'll go to the answers.
Everybody for your interesting presentation. This question is probably particularly directed at Richard, but for all of you. Especially in the UK, we have seen an erosion of policies and support for energy policy in recent years, especially as more free market ideologies have been prioritised by politicians. How can we safeguard energy efficiency policy making from, let's say, more ideology-driven policies and political decision making? Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. Perhaps I'll give the chance to answer from Ludwig first and then go to Dr. Zhuolun, and then Richard can answer the second question.
Thank you for the questions. David, on the heat pumps, I mentioned that there will be the heat pump offensive in Germany, so I think it's a very ambitious goal to drive this installation capacity up. But to be honest, there is two challenges there at the moment. So on one side, the supply bottleneck, which you can feel in Germany, and secondly, well, combined with this, a shortage of the skilled workers. So this needs to be addressed, and rather on the midterm, I guess, also to get the skilled workers to achieve this goal. Thanks. I would pass on to.
Okay, thank you. For the second question, actually, I think this is a good question. Actually, we see that, like, when we try to put energy efficiency as the first priority of the policy making, actually we cannot do that. One is that energy efficiency is not like renewable energy. That renewable energy, you can see that, okay, we use solar panel and then we generate that much kilowatt hour, and then that's very direct. And then energy efficiency normally is hiding, behind the scene. So it's very difficult. But actually, we have several approaches, that either from top down or from bottom up. Normally we do it from bottom up. That is that we use pilot projects, and then once we implement some of the pilot project, we show the results, and then this result, actually we're trying to connect all the dots together. So if we have 10 pilot projects, for example, and then we say that, okay, this is the result, and then we try to convince the policymakers, this should be prioritized. And then another thing is that, according to our experience for project implementation, we think that incentive policy, business model, and suitable technology is the three motivations, to drive the car, go to the carbon neutrality. And then the key thing here is how to define the suitable role of the government. So, in my opinion, that the government should, like a football game, the government should not be the player. The role of the government is more or less on how to create the fair environment for both investors and end users. And then it is the investor or service provider and end users who are playing in the field for the game. So actually, in that case, policy makers or government need to think about more, market guidance, like that kind of role, instead of, putting a lot of incentive policy or financial subsidy for these projects. So, thank you.
Okay, yes, I would like to add something. There are two levels which are important the national level, but also the local level regarding governance. I mean, at the national level, for instance, the UK, you can have some decisions which are important in addition to what was already said. For instance, at the European level, we try to have new standards, new obligations regarding the energy efficiency of the appliances we buy. It is the fact with refrigerators, but it could be the same, exactly the same for small air conditioners. Secondly, well, you have the local level. For instance, regarding district cooling and heating, the role of cities is the most important role. I mean, without the help of the city, without a plan in the city, it is impossible to do it. So it is absolutely essential to involve the local levels, the cities, the regions, to implement such systems. As I told before, we cannot only improve the appliances, we can do it, but this is not enough. We also have to do it at a local level, and I have the experience of district cooling in some towns, for instance in France, in Paris, in Marseille, and it is difficult to convince the municipalities to have to build such.
Thank you very much. Yosr, we have to rush now to a reflection from Jutta Paulus, is a member of the European Parliament for the German Green Party, and she will provide reflection from both the topic of cooling and heating.
Thank you very much, and sorry for rushing a bit, but actually, as I'm the shadow rapporteur for the F-gas regulation, which has, of course, a lot to do with district heating and cooling, and there is a negotiation meeting running right now, so I'll already be late for that, so please don't feel offended if I rush it through a bit. I found it very interesting to see the different challenges in the sectors. Also, if you look at it from a country like Germany, being in a rather cool climate, being a very developed country, a very heavily industrialized country, and on the contrary, the challenges in a country like Bangladesh, where temperatures are different, where the sectors are different, and how do we bring all this together? And I have noted down quite a few things, and I would like to start with questioning a bit the implications on the food demand in 2050. I have just read the book Earth for All, which is comparing two scenarios from the new report of the Club of Rome. And they are comparing the scenario too little too late with the scenario giant leap, which is very refreshing literature, actually, because they show we can do it, but we have to move. And we all have to move. And this is why I'm coming back to those projections, because they say we will probably not surpass the 9 billion people on this planet due to policies that are already in place, due to better education for women, for example, due to different kinds of social security being deployed so that people are not depending on having a large family to get to have a life insurance for old age, for example. And they also say we will have to move on our diets because there's simply not enough land available for all the world shifting to the, let's say, the global North diet with a lot of meat and dairy. And therefore, I'm not sure whether the cooling demand will increase so much in future. But in any case, what we will have to do is to make it more sustainable. And this is why I'm negotiating so hard in the F-gas regulation. And I would like to let you all reflect on Europe is now setting quite high standards for phasing out F-gases until 2050, at least that's our goal, and for shifting as soon as possible to gases with lower GWP than the F-gases we're using today. But I will have to fight very hard for forbidding exports of F-gases, because I think it's totally senseless to say we are phasing out at home, but we're exporting it to the whole world so that they don't change the technology. That doesn't make sense. That would be just offshoring emissions to other countries instead of giving them the opportunity to leapfrog. And therefore, I would like you all to support me in your governments, in your countries, and also in talking to the politicians in your member states, saying, hey, this is not a good idea to go on importing those F-gases and relying on a technology that is bound to die. Because if the world wants to become climate neutral, we cannot afford having a single sector taking up already today 3% coming from F-gases. And if it's going to grow, that's even more. That would be as much as the whole aviation sector or the whole maritime sector worldwide, just to have an impression of how much impact it has. So that would be really very important. I like very much what you said about district cooling, because I think with a warming climate, with ever more heat waves, we will see an increasing demand for cooling, especially in the global north. And there are so good examples already worldwide. Even in small towns, one is in my constituency, and I visited their district heating and cooling system, which I found very interesting, because what they're doing, they're using a cool district heating. So the district heating is at only 15, 16 degrees, so that the individual houses still need a small heat pump to cover their heating demands. But the cool thing is that through the heating in winter, the earth around the network is cooled, and in summer they use this cooled earth for cooling those same houses, which I find extremely efficient and a really smart idea. And I also like what you said, Ludwig, about the district heating and cooling plants. This is what we are, as a parliament, have decided in our position on the Energy Efficiency Directive, that each municipality of at least 35,000 inhabitants should make such a plan. We are trying to fight this through in the trilogues right now, because the council says, oh, that's too much bureaucracy. That's not bureaucracy, that's just intelligence. Because we simply cannot afford wasting so much energy in individual heating and cooling, especially, as I said, we will have ever more heat waves coming. Yes, I think what's also very interesting for me is how much the livestock sector is dependent on small farming. I wasn't aware of that, because here in Europe we're accustomed to those mass industrial farming deployments, but I wasn't aware that it's different in developing countries. And I was asking myself, and maybe someone could enlighten me in writing after this event, because I really have to run in a few minutes. What did the people do before there was cooling even? Because, I mean, those farmers have probably been farmers for ages, or the families have been farmers for ages. So how did they use the dairy and the meat? What techniques did they have to avoid food waste? Because, I mean, no one likes food waste and everyone wants to avoid it. So they have to have done something over centuries. We know in Switzerland they just made cheese out of the milk, and they made the cheese which doesn't require a lot of cooling. So I would be interested in what kind of old technologies are there which could be used. And one last issue I wanted to shortly touch is the issue of waste incineration. Waste incineration is often seen as a clever way of getting energy used, but we must avoid locking into technologies that should also be phased down, actually, because what we've seen in Europe, especially in Germany, where there were some waste incineration facilities which were oversized. So what we're seeing is the import of waste to feed those waste incineration facilities, which doesn't really make sense. And at the end of the day, most of the energy which can be used comes in the end from fossil fuels. So we only have one more cycle where the product which was made from fossil fuels is used then to be incinerated. Well, you could incinerate the fossil fuels directly without having much change. So I think we have to tackle the planetary boundaries which we transgressed already in a holistic manner. So sustainability doesn't only mean energy efficiency. It doesn't only mean tackling climate change. It also means tackling biodiversity loss. It also means transitioning to a circular economy. And there I would be extremely careful with waste incineration, because at the end of the day, you'll get the argument, well, we cannot close this waste incineration plant because then people will freeze. So this is something where we should be really, really careful. How much waste will we have in future if, for example, we would also like to transition to chemcycling for plastics, so that plastics will be recycled to some sort of naphtha where you can make new plastics from, and then you simply will not have so much waste to burn. So that's only a caveat which I wanted to share with you, because also of the bad experience which we've had in Germany. Thank you very much for your attention, and please don't be offended that I have to close and I have to run now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judith, for sharing her reflections. Before we close, I wanted to give Richard the opportunity to answer the previous question. Richard, if you don't mind, share a bit of your thoughts on the previous question, if that's okay.
No, that's fine, and thanks for asking me back. So, thanks. I think the first question was from David from RMI regarding heat.
We cannot hear you yet.
I am unmuted. How about now?
Can you try?
Sure, can you hear me now?
Yeah. Okay. Richard, I'm afraid we cannot hear you now. Probably can we... if Nora wants to come in first, if that...
Yes, hello. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you, Nora.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to this great event. I think we've heard impressive figures and we've heard impressive solutions. So I think both ground for concern and ground for hope, as it should be in an exciting event. And I don't need to repeat a lot of the insights that were said. Just to say, I think, you know, for cooling, we have this challenge that it is rising so massively. We have estimates that cooling demand in Africa will quadruple, but I've well taken note of the previous closing remarks speaker, who has some caveats about that, which I think are well noted. But the fact is that a lot of the buildings standing in 2040, 2050 are not even built yet, and we'll have to manage the heating and cooling of those buildings in some form or fashion, right? Either actively or through passive measures. So we have this massive increase in cooling demand. For heating, I've had it described, I'm not sure if in this event, but in general, as the elephant in the room, which I think is quite adequate. So I think, you know, if we manage to tackle those two challenges, we will have gotten a long way in tackling the climate challenge. We won't have solved it, but we will have come a long way. And the great thing is that we've heard that the solutions are there, and they're not just there, they're being applied, right? We have the heat pumps, but we also have the district energy solutions. I agree with the previous speaker. This is indeed quite exciting. And we see them all over the world. And then, of course, we have all the passive, the natural solutions, if you will. How do we design our buildings? What materials do we use? And so on and so on. So I think, you know, we see we can do it. We are doing it. Are we doing it fast enough? Probably not, given the challenge that we're facing. But we know, the good thing is that we know what we need to do, and we know how to. And I'll stop with that. And thank you so much for this exciting event. And sorry, I mean, I apologize. Just I wanted to say one more thing, which is that at this COP, and some of you are aware, we have a buildings pavilion, which is in lot number 113 in the zone C, in the blue zone. So do come and see us. There'll be another event on heating there tomorrow morning, if I'm not mistaken. So do come and see us. I think that that'll allow some deep dive into the challenge. And with that, I'll stop. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Nora. And with that, I'm afraid we have to close the event. Thank you very much for the participation. And thank you very much to our brilliant speakers as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, Annisa. So please welcome and join our low carbon food table, and then we are going to continue the discussions around. So thank you very much.